It's 1942. The world is at war. But for the average American, the fight felt distant. Until the danger came, knocking on the front door. The deadliest threat to the United States was not on the battlefields of Europe, but on its very doorstep, the docks and harbors of New York City. The Atlantic shipping lanes were the indispensable lifelines of the Allied war effort. They sent millions of tons of steel, food, oil, troops, and medicine overseas. But these vast, sprawling docks were controlled by one power, older, deeper, and more feared than any official union, police force, or politician: the Mafia. German U-boats were now prowling close to American shores, becoming invisible hunters. Allied ships were going down with terrifying efficiency, some within sight of the coast, their silhouettes burning against the New York night sky. And then came the intelligence reports, confirming the Navy's worst fears. There were saboteurs and spies operating inside the docks themselves. They were setting fires, tampering with cargo manifests, and guiding German torpedoes with terrifying accuracy. New York Harbor, the very heart of the American war machine, was compromised. The immediate fallout was catastrophic. In early 1942, a massive fire ripped through the SS Normandy, the famed French luxury liner that was being converted into a troop transport. The fire destroyed the ship and shut down a critical pier. The official cause was an accident, but the Navy suspected German interference. Suddenly, the fight against the Axis was not in the Atlantic. It was in the back alleys of Manhattan. The Navy and government agencies knew they could not clean up the waterfront using traditional methods. The corruption was too thick, while the loyalty too ironclad. They needed instantaneous control. And the only man who truly had that control were not Navy SEALs or FBI agents. They were gangsters, and their leader was sitting behind bars, serving a life sentence. His name was Charles "Lucky" Luciano. By 1942, Luciano was already the most powerful crime boss in America. But he was a prisoner. He was serving a sentence that was meant to be the end of his empire. In 1936, the relentless prosecutor Thomas E. Dewey had successfully secured his conviction, sentencing him up to 50 years in New York's maximum security prison. It was a massive victory for law and order, but now law and order were desperate. Luciano was locked away, living his life in a 6-by-8-foot cell, but his power lived on. His network of lieutenants, the dock bosses he installed, and the families that still answered to his word, held the key to the entire operation. They had the ability to stop the flow of information, to quiet the violence, and to turn the entire waterfront on a dime. Early that year, two shadows in dark suits, men from the Office of Naval Intelligence, ONI, arrived at the prison. They didn't ask to see the warden. They went directly to Luciano's cell. What they proposed was unthinkable: a secret, desperate partnership between the United States Navy and the American underworld. They called it Operation Underworld. The Navy's request was simple in word, but colossal in scope. Luciano must use his influence to protect the docks. No sabotage, no strikes, total cooperation with the U.S. war effort. In return, the Navy made a veiled but undeniable promise: help would not be forgotten. Luciano knew exactly what that meant. He agreed. From inside his prison cell, Luciano began sending orders through his trusted network. His childhood friend and brilliant strategist, Meyer Lansky, acted as the crucial bridge to the outside world. Lansky coordinated directly with naval officers, using the vast network of street muscle and backroom information to identify potential spies, root out saboteurs, and ensure the docks ran smoothly. The mobsters were suddenly better equipped for counterintelligence than the government agencies. Almost overnight, the change was visible. The strikes stopped. The violence quieted. The waterfront, once a breeding ground for corruption and fear, became one of the most secure areas in the entire country. The Mafia had effectively turned from criminals into an unofficial, unseen arm of national defense. But this strange, immoral alliance was about to play an even greater and far more public role in one of the most important operations of the entire war, the Allied invasion of Sicily in 1943. The Allies were preparing to strike at the soft underbelly of Europe, but they needed intelligence, detailed maps, safe routes, and most crucially, trusted local contacts who would not betray them to the German and fascist forces. They turned again to Luciano, the man who, born Salvatore Lucania, knew every alley and every name in his native Sicily. Through hidden messages, a web of communications that spanned the Atlantic and bypassed every official censorship office, Luciano reached out to the Sicilian Mafia. These men, long oppressed and aggressively persecuted by Mussolini's fascist regime, harbored a deep, burning hatred for the Italian government. They were eager to help the Americans, seeing them as liberators. When Allied troops landed in Sicily, they were not alone. The Sicilian Mafia was there. They guided them through enemy territory, secured key towns, and even arranged for locals to welcome the soldiers with open arms. Their cooperation saved countless lives and helped pave the way for Italy's liberation, turning a slow march into a rapid advance. For the rest of the war, Operation Underworld remained a closely guarded secret, known only to a few top brass and a handful of politicians. Sabotage attempts vanished. The docks ran efficiently. The lifeline of the free world stayed open, because the government had made a deal with the very people it once hunted. They had traded with the devil to win the war. And then came the question, what was the price of salvation? In 1946, the answer arrived. Governor Thomas E. Dewey, the same man who had fought tirelessly to put Luciano away, commuted his sentence. The official reason: cooperation with military authorities during wartime. The truth: Operation Underworld had worked. The nation's security had been compromised, and the ultimate price was the freedom of its most powerful enemy. Luciano was freed, but not to return home. He was deported to Italy. As he stepped onto the ship that would take him away, he looked back at the Manhattan skyline, the city he had ruled, the empire he had built. He was said to have stared for hours, having traded his physical freedom in America for a life in luxurious, powerful exile in Naples. He secured his place in history with the blood of 2 countries. It was one of the strangest alliances ever forged, a secret pact between law and crime, made in the shadows for the sake of victory. In the end, it wasn't just soldiers and generals who shaped the outcome of the war. They saved the lifeline of the free world. The secret deal remains one of the most unbelievable, powerful, and deeply ironic choices ever made in the face of war.